You can't replace part of the brain. Like,
you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the puppets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the $90 billion company. They had help up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khateeb.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. Guest today, no introduction needed, the people's champ. So Joseph Othman is one of those people's champs, you know, in terms of the number of times you've been on the show. But in terms of downloads, there's a reigning champ, and that's depending on the platform. That's Jim Alecxih. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing? Great to see you, man.
Great to see you too. Great catching up. And I'm certainly not as frequent a guest as Joe is, but I always love coming on and just talking about.
Change that, man. We got to change that. So we have a great topic today, which I love, essentially the science and art of tailoring your value prop to the customer in front of you versus just show up and throw up pitches. Before we get into that, you took on a really interesting role. Congratulations. So I want to ask you, like, before we get to that role, like, one is what's the role, what's the company? But the other side of it is that unless you moved locations, what's with the guitars in the background? Because those are beautiful guitars. So I'm wondering, do those two things have anything in common? So give us a little update on your end before we dive into the topic.
Yeah. So, thanks for asking. I took a CEO job for a company called Digital Harmonic Medical. It's software platforms that process images and sounds, and it's used in national security and satellites in the military complex. They found me and they thought it had great medical applications. And specifically, there's a lot of different applications, but we can actually turn down the radiation output in fluoroscopy systems and make the images better than they were before and reduce the contrast agent. We can help with images in surgical videos and a variety of other things. But it was invented, these software platforms were invented by a gentleman named Paul Reed Smith, who founded and owned PRS Guitars. And so super interesting guy. Obviously has built a huge business in the guitar industry and then built a really big software company as well. So I decided I always try about once every 12 to 15 months, I try to do something that's really hard. And I'm a big believer that you need to be in a high learning environment, something that makes you nervous, something that you can fail at. And so I taught myself I didn't teach myself, I learned how to fly an airplane and fly an airplane. I learned how to cook and a number of other things. So I decided, since I was working, my chairman is a guitar manufacturer. I decided I was going to learn how to play the guitar. And it's slow going, and I'm certainly not ready for prime time, but it is such a fascinating endeavor, particularly at this stage of my life, to pick up something new and try it. So I really, really enjoy it. And Paul makes beautiful guitars, pieces of art. And if you've never had an opportunity to go into a guitar store and look at PRS guitars, they're just amazing. And just to remind me that I need to practice if I'm going to get any good. So that's the story behind the guitars.
That's amazing. Again, before we get to the topic, so essentially, can you talk a little bit more about the technology? Because you mentioned like a really big thing, which essentially you put it as like volume, but turning down fluoroscopy and certain imaging. Can you just talk a little bit about the technology? We'll have you back to talk specifically just about this, about the company. So Digital Harmonics is the website digitalharmonics.com?
Digitalharmonic.com.
Harmonic with singular. Okay.
Digital.
Can you talk a little bit about the tech before we get into the sales topic, real quick?
Yeah, there's actually 3 distinct software packages. The first one's called Keyframe, and it's an AI program that optimizes video images in between 6 and 15 milliseconds. And it can take any surgical video, real time or post surgery, and process it and make it much, much clearer, make the colors much brighter. The surgical plane, tissue planes are much more clear. But the interesting thing is it takes about 60% reduction in the amount of bit rate that it requires to transmit that. So if you had a robust number of robots or endoscopy, laparoscopy platforms that you wanted to connect and you wanted to transmit surgical video or telehealth video, stroke diagnosis, our technology would help you do that in a low bandwidth environment and make the video much more clear. So that's our first one. Our second one's called Pure Pixel, and it's used in national security, and essentially it helps. So if you imagine if you were, my example I give people, if you walked into your living room at night and you turned all the lights off and you took a picture of in your living room, your iPhone screen would come out completely dark. But that doesn't mean the furniture is still not in that picture. And so we have a program that uses brute force mathematics that essentially draws out the contrast and could take that picture and draw all the furniture out in that picture. And so what we do is we break the relationship between radiation output and quality of image. The higher the radiation output, the higher quality of image. And so we're saying because we can work on the contrast of the picture, we can turn down the radiation of a fluoroscopy system. And I worked for a short time in a fluoroscopy company, and I was amazed at all the companies that were trying to do better shields or better, lead lining or filters or wedges, but nobody was actually talking about, like, I wonder how we actually use less radiation to accomplish this. And so when I saw this application, I wanted to get involved. And then our last program is called the Precision Measuring Matrix, and it measures sounds in a noisy environment. And so it's used to capture submarine noises and lots of other military applications. And how we're using it is we can measure heartbeats and brain waves in a much more accurate fashion. And so we're early on in the science, but we think that we may have an opportunity to look at a predictive analysis. If you gave us a 10-hour file of a heartbeat, we could tell exactly what's going on with the heart much sooner than a normal EKG would. And so we're working with some companies in the industry to look at their technology and see if we can take some brain waves, EEGs, and EKGs and really put them through some advanced diagnostics.
That's fascinating. Well, so side note, I guess I'll tease it out to the audience from now. So one is, let's have you back on the show because we have so many different med tech companies who listen to this show, and I'd love to have you back just to specifically talk about the technology. Maybe we can show some demos so that way, the power of the podcast is kind of bringing great people together and connecting them. But the second thing, I want to tease the audience and any potential sponsors who are looking for a really cool series. So as you guys know, we've been working on a U.S. surgical series. So Jim's going to be coming on for that because he was at a really, if you thought the U.S. surgical culture was tough, he was at a place called Automated Instruments, which went into U.S. surgical. So we're going to have you on for that. But the other series that we're going to be releasing, and we're starting early recordings next week with some guests, is the early years of Intuitive. And so we're interviewing not just people who are at Intuitive in the early days, but people who filled really significant roles at Intuitive. I don't want to say anything more than that. But yeah, so that's going to be coming up. So that being said, let's dive into the topic for today, or at least for this episode, which is the art and science of creating a value prop specifically for your customers. So let's start with the status quo, or where the problem that you see is today. So where does it go wrong first? And let's talk about what good looks like.
Well, I think that one of the challenges that companies have is they have sales reps who are taught to sell a product a single way. And it's usually the old school features, advantages, benefits. And that what they don't do is they don't take the time to understand each of the stakeholders in the purchasing process and tailor make their sales pitch to that person. And so it's faster, it's less expensive, it's better clinical results. But what if and I'm speaking specifically to the med device industry, but very few people take the time to figure out, what if better clinical results were not the most important thing? People can't wrap their arms around that. And so can I give a specific example? And so I did this early on in my career. I think I wrote about this in one of my posts, but this was early Intuitive, and we're selling to the physicians, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't sell it. And what I failed to realize was that if I put a rope into an OR that slowed everything down, that had instruments that were outside the budget, the person that was hurt the worst was the OR manager and the VP of nursing. And so they weren't thinking, oh, this could potentially be better for patients. That's how I was selling it. Like, you'll be on the technological forefront. You'll be ahead of your competitors. It's a great technology. It's better clinically. None of those things resonated. And I didn't take the time to say, I wonder what's important to that person, and tailor make a sales pitch around their value proposition. And so what was important to them was that they were compensated on a budget and a fixed budget. I mean, hospitals are essentially cost accounting run. I mean, it's all budgets. And so if you're going to use their budget, they were against it. And if it was going to take longer to do procedures and less throughput, that was also how they were judged. And so what I realized finally was that I was selling a device that directly negatively impacted all the metrics that they were judged on. And I had not taken the time to develop myself and to be as nuanced and a sales executive to figure out I'd better sell them differently than I sell a physician. Or in the old way, and you talked about automated instruments and U.S. surgical, the old way was to get your physician to essentially be a hammer, and you would take that physician through the hospital looking for a nail, and anybody who said no was the nail. And now, if you're selling in our industry now with value add committees and all kinds of different stakeholders, you can't use that anymore. Clinical support is just one part of the game. And so to really be successful, what you have to do is figure out who are the stakeholders in the game. Lots of people do that pretty well. There's all kinds of sales tools to figure out who all the different stakeholders. What people don't do very well is figure out how can I moderate and personalize my sales pitch, and how can I build a value proposition for each stakeholder and marry my sales pitch with that value proposition that resonates with that stakeholder. That's how you sell things quickly. And
Quick commercial break for marketing leaders and sales leaders. I don't have to tell you this, but it's worth reiterating that the time clinicians have to meet with medical reps is limited. You know this and feel this. It's been a challenge for med device sellers for decades. Now, with the rising workloads and patient care demands, clinicians' times are shrinking even more. And the window for your sellers and your sales team to meet with these clinicians consists of pretty much just minutes in a busy hospital hallway. The reality is your sellers have to make every second count, or someone else will. They must be concise, they got to be efficient, and use highly relevant information to make the most out of these brief interactions. ShowPad is all about focusing your sellers on the art of selling, which is about building trust and relationships. And while there's science, the ShowPad solution handles the behind-the-scenes prep and follow-up work to make your team more effective. The best part is that you get insights on content and training performance so you can make strategic decisions and invest more in what works based on data. ShowPad helps your sales and marketing teams spend their time in more productive, high-impact ways with a multiplying effect on your revenue results and growing your pipeline. So to learn more, go to showpad.com/State of MedTech. Now, let's get back to the show. And
so I see that there's a lot of opportunity in the industry. And this is what Gene Nagel does so well. If you're listening and you've used Gene Nagel, you know he's a world-class trainer, best that I've ever met. And his business is about really refining and personalizing value propositions. And I think that's been one of the keys to success that I've seen.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think the first thing that I want to go to, which is, why do you think that most salespeople, not just people in our industry, but most salespeople don't go through the exercise of tailoring the value prop?
I think it's a couple. I mean, you certainly could look in internally. The company doesn't provide them training, and if you look at our industry, it's lots of companies are hiring less experienced reps that are a little less expensive and don't have all of the sales training and sales experience. But I'm a big believer that you have to take responsibility for your own development. And so, if you want to be a world-class salesman, what you do is you have to be educated and informed about what each customer values. And so what happens is, you get a med device job and you're selling into the OR, and the company teaches you how to sell to surgeons. And so you're like, okay, I know how to sell surgeons, but they go to AORN one time and they never teach you, like, this is how to sell to nurses, and this is how to sell to nurse administrators, and then this is how to really sell to administrators. And I'll just take a segue here. I watched a few minutes of one of Joe's visits on your show, and he was talking about, getting into the executive suite. And I feel like that people, like most, history is interesting. They bits and pieces of intuitive, and because it's been a success, and they say, well, that's why they were successful, or they did this differently. And as you know, it's more complex than that. But one of the things that Intuitive did well was we went into the executive suites and we made it into a strategic sale. And so what you've seen is a lot of companies say, well, the key to success is getting access to the executive suites. And so I'm going to push my reps out of the OR and into the executive suites. And we're going to try to sell to executives. And like most things, they missed half of it. It's access, but it's also selling a strategic vision. And not every product is strategic. And not every product is strategic to the level of a true executive sponsor, whether it be a CEO or VP of marketing, a CMO. You have to really figure out where exactly your product fits. And then you have to, when you get in there, you have to have a pretty dynamic presentation, because you only get one shot. And if you don't belong, or you don't have a really good presentation, you're just there because your boss told you to go, or you saw other people in the industry be successful and have executive sponsors. That's not the way to do it. And so educating yourself on, what does it mean to sell to a CEO? And is it the right product to sell to a CEO? Maybe I would be better to go to a chief medical officer, or chief marketing officer, or, somewhere in the executive chain. And I don't think people oftentimes take opportunities to educate themselves and really be fully developed on how to sell to each stakeholder.
No, it makes complete sense. And I think the main thing I believe is everyone, even myself, every salesperson loves an easy sale. Like, things are going well, the customer's bought in, and, it's fantastic. But that's not how it is most of the time. And I think that it takes a lot of work and reflection to be curious enough and ask, like, what are the underlying desires and fears that this person has? And at least from my experience, like when on a smaller scale, when I launched my medical sales course, which is being sold today, and I'm not taking calls for that, it's kind of selling itself, thankfully. But in my early days, I did 180 Zoom calls with people to sell that course one by one. And something I learned very quickly was, if somebody came on the call and they were interested in the course because of the weekly calls, that's what I should just focus on and not worry about selling the other things. Because you feel as a salesperson that, like, if somebody's bought in or have an interest in one specific area, it's like, oh, well, I can enhance that other area by adding these other features in. And if anything, it just dilutes the message and it doesn't cut as much. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, I would phrase it like this. No one knows my product better than me. And I know what the best parts of the product are. And so what's important to me should be important to you. And so my pitch is going to revolve around my own view of my product. And these are the features and benefits of those features that will most impact you. Instead of saying, this is a really nuanced product, and just using your course as an example. I've looked at that course and it's multifaceted. And so if you started out with really good probes and active listening, and those two are hand in hand. I've been through sales training where it's like, okay, we're going to ask probing questions. And that was like part of the process we had to get through to tell them what we wanted to tell them. And so part of like really good probing is active listening and figuring out, if I can sell something that somebody wants to buy, that's a lot easier than selling something that I want to sell. And so how do I figure out what somebody wants to buy? I ask really good questions, and I try to figure out what problem I'm solving and how I can deliver a solution to them in the easiest way. And that's how you use probing. And you're right. The best way is to tailor make a sales presentation. And I'll just give you, a thing from my career, and I'm in it now. Everybody has a pitch deck. Sometimes they're, depends on how, what your marketing department's like. I've had pitch decks with 150 slides that I could pick and choose. I've had 10 slides, but the best presentations I've ever had I had 0 slides, or I got through 1 slide. And then we had a conversation and we started talking about what was important. What are the aspirations that person has professionally and personally, and how I could help fulfill those aspirations. And it makes all the difference. And you don't need any slides if you deliver it like that.
I love that you say that, because I always feel that people miss the point of PowerPoint or presentations. And I feel that true presentations, like the whole purpose of those slides, is that they're a supplement to you and your message, not a replacement. Like the main show isn't the slides, the main show is you. And so I feel like even with whether it's CEOs pitching investors or salespeople, I think very similar to kind of what you mentioned about the value prop is that they try and put in a bunch of stuff, hoping that one of these things are going to catch the attention of that person and persuade them. And when reality is, you need to be very focused and guide them through a story with data that's qualitative and quantitative, et cetera. Even like a CEO of a hospital, there's an economic story, but it's not an economic pitch. It's an economic story for a reason. And I think that you have to be able to control that person's attention, right? Because then, if let's say the hypothesis you had about their desires and fears is correct. And if not, you're able to gauge that and change right then and there. Do you feel like maybe that's why like your best pitches were when you didn't have a slide deck, because you were able to real time focus on the feedback you're getting from that person you're selling and then adjust your value prop and pitch in real time, versus if you have a slide deck, like you're stuck, like you can't deviate from that?
Well, I have a couple of rules about PowerPoint that I think
I'd love to hear. So these are your rules on PowerPoint.
Yep. Less is more. That's really important. And 2 is you should be able to present a PowerPoint slide without ever looking at the screen. And so the slides should be behind me. I know it so well. When I was when I was a sales rep or sales manager with Intuitive, and I was giving, just talking to people. And even now, as I'm talking to people about a proprietary technology that nobody's ever seen anything like what we're doing. If I turn around and read the slides off the screen, it's so ineffective. Instead, I'm like, we're having a conversation and I'm about ready to put an image that reinforces the story that I'm telling you. And so if you have a lot of, low font text on a slide, you're not telling a story. You're basically doing a data dump. And so imagine if you were telling a story. Imagine if we were having this conversation. And as I was recounting it, over my right shoulder, an image came up that reinforced the story that I was telling. Just think how impactful that would be. And I don't need any words. And so I can have a header that says, hey, I want to reinforce this one point. But if you're turning around and reading the slide and your customers are seeing the back of your head because you're reading the slide, first of all, just think about that. You're reading what's on the screen back to them. That makes no sense whatsoever. And at that point, you've really devolved down into just a feature and a benefits. Like, I'm going to data dump on you, and you're not telling a story. And people tell stories. Actually, will you give me a minute to give you my sales philosophy?
Love to hear your sales philosophy.
Okay, here, this is the one thing that I kind of distilled out of all my days of selling different products and getting beat up. And I think that most sales reps look at customers as a barrier, and I use my hand as the barrier. And what they do is they go and they put their products against the barrier to see where the weak spot is. Like, do you like that it does this? Do you like that it does this? Is this your need? Can you understand that if it could do this, how it could help you? And so you're just looking for the weak point. Then, okay, that's the beginning of the conversation. And you think how ineffective that is in ways. First of all, you're looking at your customer as the barrier to a sale. And 2 is you're taking all the objections and you're putting them on the horizontal plane. And what you want to do is you want to put them on the vertical plane. And so the most important objections at the top, I don't like the color, the BS objections at the bottom, right? And so how could you get that in your sales pitch? And I'll tell you how I do it, is I believe that every person that you talk to has personal and professional aspirations, and they look at what they want to be professionally, where they want to be financially. You have small children, you look at what you want to be your family to be in 5 years. And so if you can get somebody to tell you that story, like, this is where I hope my organization's in 5 years. This is where I hope I am professionally in 5 years. And it won't be that overt. It's in a dynamic conversation where you understand exactly where they want to be. And so I put it like this, this is the customer, and your product comes and dovetails into their aspirations. And then they realize, if you do that, that they can't actually realize their aspirations without your product. And then if there's an objection, after you tell that story and you combine your product and your services with their aspirations, what they say next will be a real objection. It will be the objections on a vertical plane. It will be the most important objection, if there really is one. I don't have the authority to sign it. I don't have the budget. It's not like everybody says, well, I don't have the money, or I don't have this or that. But if you want to really get to the bottom of what you need to solve to get your sale, that's how you sell. You find where people want to be professionally and personally, you dovetail your product, and then you solve their outstanding issues. And you'll sell a lot of product regardless of what you're selling. You'll sell a lot of it.
I love that. And I feel that while there's definitely an art form to sales in terms of like your tone of voice, the way you position things, etc., I think at the same time, there's the scientific part of it where framing it out is so important. And I feel like, at least like in marketing, some of the best marketing strategies and campaigns, whether my agency came up with it or we did it with a client or I've just seen it in the wild, is you find out that the team ahead of time actually framed it out and whiteboarded it and like talk through these things, right? Because it becomes very easy to start designing around that versus doing it on the fly. And I think that it's not that hard to do, because let's just take it back to like selling to a surgeon, I think is more obvious, but let's say a hospital administrator. And so if you try and, boil it down and say, okay, what's going on in this person's environment? What's their desires and fears, and who are they trying to impress? It becomes very clear that like, one hospital CEO, their goal is like cost reduction versus another one might be generating more revenue.
Exactly.
Those are two very different pitches, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, there were 2 hospitals in Atlanta, which will go unnamed, but one is a prolific acquirer of hospitals, and they're seeking to buy everything they can in Atlanta. And the other one's just holding on and just trying to prevent an erosion of their market share, and they're really dynamic physicians. And so imagine selling those 2 CEOs with the same pitch. And like it would be really ineffective, because you would go to the one hospital and say, hey, this can really help you be, dynamic in the marketplace, and can help you, in an acquisition mode, and you can put these services in place or whatever it may be. And if you said that to one, they'd be like, okay, I get it. If you said it to the other, they're like, I'm just holding on. I've got a budget. And so I don't want to go bankrupt. I want to stay. I want to, maintain or retain my physicians. That's where you have to be really thoughtful about asking good questions. And that's part of belonging in the environment. If you're nervous about asking questions and not understanding the answers, you haven't taken the opportunity to really develop yourself sufficiently. And how do you do that? You find you find somebody to mentor you that has been in there, or you find a hospital administrator that's friendly and say, hey, what questions do I ask? That's part of developing yourself and really understanding, like, how do you tell that story and make it impact?
No, that makes so much sense. And I think the other side of it is, what I'm hearing as an underlying theme here is this theme around curiosity. Right. And also, I think taking advantage of, the one thing that is often a topic internally for marketing terms is sales taking advantage of all the tools that they have at their disposals, whether it's sales materials, KLs, etc. Do you feel like one of those things is that I feel like on the capital sales side, sometimes a rep gets too comfortable thinking that the clinical champion will move it across the line, and they don't take advantage of, I'll give you an example is, let's say you're going to go in front of VAC committee, right? Or you're going to go talk to the CEO or whoever it is, and talking to that clinical champion saying, hey, what do I need to know about this person and what are they looking for? I feel like that's such a simple and obvious question that so many reps seem to just miss.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just go back to reps getting comfortable. I think that letting customers buy on their own timeline is a lot easier than having customers buy on your timeline. And so if you want to be really comfortable, then you just say, hey, whenever you work through your process and whenever the budget dollars are available, I'll be here for you. And there's a lot of sales reps, particularly big iron, that say, I just can't impact a long-term sales cycle. And so they become laissez-faire, and they get comfortable and they maintain relationships. They get on the budget and then they fight to keep it on. And not every technology can be bought on a company's timeline. But I think with capital sales, really understanding how you diplomatically push timelines while maintaining professionalism and relationships. You can't burn the bridges or burn the boats on every sales call. I mean, that's not sustainable. And so you have to be professional. You have to manage relationships, but you have to give incentives. And when I say incentives, I don't mean discounting. That is the least effective. People think that that's what motivates people, but it really doesn't. And so, I think in really helping people get to a decision, because, it goes back to my analogy. If you had an aspiration, professional or personal, and I gave you the key for you to achieve that, then it would be antithetical to say, well, okay, I fully understand that would help me achieve my professional and personal goals, but I'm going to wait. I'm not going to do it. And you'd be like, well, what are you going to wait for? Well, then, of course, there's no logical answer to that. You wouldn't. If you really believed in it, you would say, okay, how do I make this happen as quickly as possible? And I think that's in all areas of our life, Omar. I mean, once you understand the keys to success, these are the things you have to do, then, like executing on them and executing on them in a timely fashion becomes really important. And that's what great sales reps do, is they make customers understand that executing now is so much more advantageous than executing a quarter from now or 2 quarters from now. So, how to do that diplomatically and professionally is an art.
No, I agree. And I think, there is, on one side, I agree with you that you can't force somebody to buy on your timeline, but, reps are held to a quota. And I feel like the only way to really solve for this is getting better at not only managing pipeline, but adding to pipeline. Like I'll use, again, my business is the best example to me. If I only had 1 or 2 companies I was talking to for deals in terms of for my growth agency, I mean, you can't show up to those meetings without coming off a little needy. And so the only way that I'm able to solve for that is that I have a lot of deals in my pipeline, and some take 6 to 9 months to close. Some of them close literally within 30 days. But I can hear some of the audience members saying that oh, but Omar, I have a very limited territory and there's only X amount of accounts or deals that I can actually get to. And so what's your message to those reps who have let's say a limited market, so they can't pack their pipeline with 5, 10, 15 deals. Let's say there's really only maybe five hospitals they can really go after. So what do they do in that situation? That may not be an existing situation, but I figured I'd throw a curveball at you on that.
Omar, I always wonder how honest to be on these things, but
you should be as honest as possible, because the audience loves it. This is not a canned podcast. I think this is why we're the number one show, is that we have really honest and candid conversations with our guests. So go for it.
Okay. So if you want to be successful and manage your career, you need to be aware of all the macro environment as well as just your own territory. So if you are a highly experienced, highly compensated senior rep in a territory with 5 hospitals and you're near saturation, someone in your company is sitting in a room trying to figure out how to reduce the cost of sales. And how do you reduce the cost of sales? Well, if I have a fully penetrated market, why can't I hire a junior rep that can maintain the business, because the growth opportunities aren't there anymore? And so then, that's how rifts happen. That's how, precipitous compensation declines happen, where they just hope for voluntary attrition. And so my message to those people would be, manage your career effectively. And if you have built a territory that is a dynamic business that has a limited amount of growth, you can decide, hey, I'm going to run it until it's over and figure out the next step, or I'm going to proactively manage my career and take my skill sets and get into a dynamic growth company, if that's the right thing for your personal stage and a number of other factors. I think that I've always been bemused by people who are like, hey, I've crushed this territory for 5 years in a row and my income's going up, and it's just a linear road up into more income. That's how the industry works. And if you look at one of the biggest changes in our industry in the last 10 years, I would say one of them is how many entry-level people are in territories. It used to be like you had to have 3 to 5 years of business-to-business sales, and then you'd come in as a territory associate and do that for a couple of years, and then maybe you get a really small territory. There are companies that are hiring people right out of college or maybe 1 year of experience, full territories, and it's primarily because they can train them in a repeatable fashion, and they're not very expensive, and they're fungible. If you lose one, you can go get another one. So that's my answer. My second answer.
Shameless plug too. I was gonna say, for those companies who are able to hire like either junior people or people with very little experience and get success out of them, I was like, they probably hired a guy like Gene Nagel to design their sales training. Shout out to you, Gene. Like, we love what you do, and he's really good at it.
Exactly. And if you haven't hired him, you should, because he can help really junior salespeople hyper accelerate their learning curve. But without being so nihilistic as to say that there's going to be a riff, if I were that rep also, I would really sit down and start thinking like a business person instead of like a rep. And I would say, I wonder how I could change the margin profile. I wonder how I could have like no discounts for the next year. How I could start to really move into a consultant role outside of just my sphere of influence. So if you're covering cases all day, and you say, okay, I really want to educate myself, and you start to really branch out and understand, and you build relationships. You're building relationships for your own personal brand as well as your employer. And so if at some point you decide to do something different, you can leverage those relationships. But what I wouldn't do, I can't say this strenuous enough, what I wouldn't do is just do my job every day and be in a total comfort zone where I just do the same thing every day, and I've got all my customers, and I've got a business that seems impenetrable, because two things are true. There's somebody out there that are trying to figure out how to take your business. And two is, you're stultifying your own intellectual development, and that's a bad place to be. Be uncomfortable, and if you're uncomfortable and you feel like you can fail, that's as alive as you'll feel, and so I can't encourage people enough to do that.
All right, everyone, quick commercial break. If you're a MedTech CEO/founder, or maybe you're a sales or marketing leader at a startup or a scale-up, you're going to want to listen to this. Are you struggling to get in front of your ideal audience, whether that's investors or perhaps clinicians who want to adopt your product? Maybe you're getting ghosted. You send emails and messages and nothing comes back, nothing happens, right? Or worse, nobody knows who you are, right? In business, visibility is everything. And I always tell people, if you want to persuade before persuasion can happen, you have to learn how to get attention. So if your sales team is desperate for traction, clinicians don't know your name, investors have never heard of you, you're losing opportunities every day. And that needs to change now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. That's where my company Khateeb & Co. comes in. We don't just do marketing, we do growth. We figure out how to engineer markets by creating magnetic messaging that makes you impossible to ignore. And we build high impact strategies, of course using social media, but other channels such as email, text, and others to help turn content and messaging into commercial pipeline, and it leads into closed deals. As an example, we worked with a surgical robotics company in raising a $31 million Series A, and then they needed help on their pre-market release. So we packed their CRM with 198 surgeon leads and nurtured them down that ended up becoming
4 closed hospitals. 4 hospitals closed and adopted this technology within a period of 6 months, and they got 2 great key opinion leaders in the process. So whether you're a startup founder wearing too many hats, or maybe you have a marketing team that just spread too thin and they don't have the expertise, my team and I plug in and partner up with your company, and we amplify your reach. From crafting powerful sales scripts to optimizing your team's demo calls, creating content, having it go out on a consistent basis, we transform your outreach into a growth engine. So if you're ready to dominate your market, you're ready to become a no name and people to know of you and take your calls and take your meetings, I want you to act right now. Don't wait anymore, because you've already wasted plenty of time. Go to growmymedtech.com. That's growmymedtech.com. And I want you to schedule a quick call. My team and I will give you a free analysis with 2 to 3 actionable ideas. There's no strings attached. And if we're a fit, great. We can get partnered up and we can help you go to the next level. And if not, look, the ideas are always free. So do not wait and don't waste any more time. Go to growmymedtech.com right now, and let's make you the go-to name in your niche. Now, let's get back to the episode. And this is why we're such good friends. I'm completely with you on that. I think I always tell people that if you draw a Venn diagram of 2 circles and one is safe and one is comfortable, in the middle is essentially like the riskiest place you can be, which is being safe and comfortable. And I think, if you want to, both you and I are lovers of like books and philosophy and stuff, but I think if you look at the human condition, when you're doing something in life, whether it's like a business or a new career move or something, when you're sort of on the edge of a void and on one side is failure, the other one is massive success, and you're kind of walking that line, in some weird way, it's like the most alive you ever feel.
That's right.
That's
right. And I think, the problem with, safety and comfort is that, you have people that are depending on it. And it's not just like you're, an individual contributor in life. You have a partner or a family or children or, financial obligations. And so to step out of a safe and really comfortable environment is really hard. And you better know why you're doing it, whether you're running away from something or towards something, and have great criteria. One of the things that kind of where I'm at is I have 3 daughters, as you know, and one of them just graduated from SMU last year, and I've got one that's graduating from SMU this year, and then I've got a sophomore. And so I'm talking them through going into their careers. What do they want to do? And so it's been a long time since I've been in college looking for a job. I always knew I had limited options. I was going to be in sales, and so, but I have daughters that are much smarter than I am, and so. What I do is, instead of, saying, well, you could do this or you could do this, what I said was the key element of making good decisions is having a set of criteria that are basically a standard that you can compare any opportunity to. And I think that, picking a mate, if you have a criteria of like, these are my 3 or 4 things I won't compromise on. These are the 3 or 4 things that I really would like to have. And these are 3 or 4 things that I'll compromise on. I think that's a better way to approach it than just saying, wow, like, it seems like a great idea to get engaged, or in the same in the job, like it's a really cool product, or this is the next wave and I could make a lot of money and my friends are over there. And so this is my shameless plug, to the listening audience, Omar has been a great supporter for me, half whip, half carrot for me to post on LinkedIn and do a podcast. And so I've been posting on LinkedIn about this exact thing. Like, why, what are you looking for in a new job? And you should look at, and I don't have an exhaustive list. I just have 6 or 7 things, but we're going to move on to a series about like the 5 most important decisions in life and how do you make them good? If you get the 5 most important decisions in life right, you're going to be pretty successful. And if you don't, you're going to have to work really hard for happiness and satisfaction, deep satisfaction and prosperity and a number of other things. And so, back to our original topic, I encourage people that are in those safety zones to really figure out what the criteria is that they're looking for and what their tolerance, their risk tolerance is, their uncomfortable tolerance. For me, I have a huge tolerance for being uncomfortable. When I get comfortable, I get antsy. And so, but you have to know that about yourself.
That's when you start taking up learning how to like fly planes and stuff.
What I'd say about flying an airplane is that the consequence for a mistake can be awfully high. And so that's one of the things that attracted me to it, is that it's not like golf where, hey, I didn't do it for a month and I'm hitting it all over the lot and I, shot 90. If you fly, you're pretty serious about it because, a mistake can be, pretty high consequence. And that's one of the things that I loved about it.
Yeah, and there's a level of focus that comes with it. I was listening, Elon Musk went on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah, interesting about the video games.
That's exactly, yeah. See, this is why we're friends. So he's talking about like, he's like ranked top 10 in the world for Diablo. And he's talking about that. The nice thing about video games is like you have to be really locked in and paying attention to what you're doing, because if you make a mistake, you're going to lose. And so playing it at like an expert level, like really takes a lot of focus, and there's a certain zen that comes along with that. And I completely agree, especially these days. I think it's great that the world is connected. We have social media, we have so much content. I mean, look, while I'm driving, I can listen to a podcast and get educated, right? The problem though is that we've lost this ability to sit down and really hyper-focus our minds. And you see that even, look, I love books. I see that in books. If you look at books that were written, even 20 years ago, but let's just say 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you can tell like the author literally wrote this with a lot of emphasis, a lot of focus, and they didn't write this book to make money, unless it was Napoleon Hill, but he was very successful at that. And so you see that, and I feel that you see that it manifests also in careers where, I can't tell you, I'm sure you get the same message. I get so many messages from people, mainly because of the podcast and how I'm plugged into technology, but like, Omar, like, what's the next big thing? And it's usually from salespeople who are looking like, what's the next big thing? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong questions. You know what I mean? Like, okay, for next big thing, when I was in marketing, like at the time, was like gene therapies and things like that, and like in the biotech world. Never went into it. You know why? I had zero interest in it. Zero interest. And in terms of the people that I would work around, there were plenty of great people, but not the kind of people that I was interested to get groomed and mentored by. Right. And I think that a lot of times when you think about, I feel like when you think about your career and things you're going to do, instead of like a succeed failure, I always look at it as like a skill stack. So like, what skills am I adding to my skill stack and how is this going to develop me further? Right. And more importantly, to sort of move up the ladder, not in the corporate sense, but in terms of how can I sit higher and see farther as a business person? And I think that a lot of salespeople who ask me that question, if they did this exercise, they wouldn't be asking me that question, because there's self-reflection on yourself and then a larger reflection on the macro side.
Yeah. And I think, you talked about people asking you what the next big thing is. Here's what people don't realize is that waves are usually products or companies or services that solve big problems. And solving big problems is really, really hard. And so a couple of things about solving big problems. Usually there's 4 or 5 people that fail at it, and 1 person or 2 people actually succeed at it. And it's never like overnight. You might have just heard about them, but it's never overnight. There's a long list and years of work of trying to solve big problems. And so you can run your career, and I know people have done it who, particularly in sales, just try to catch the next big sales wave. And every 2 or maybe 3 years, they try to pick a new technology. And so, if you look at that and you say, well, I picked 50% of the winners, okay, that means, and you lasted 3 years, that means every 3 years you're in a dead end job. You picked the wrong technology. And that's really no way to be. I mean, you could do it if that's what you want to do. That was never for me. What I did was, I really sat down early on and I defined my aspirations, like really where I wanted to be. And oftentimes those seem impossible. And quite frankly, some of them have come true and some of them haven't. But I was thinking of you, just in relation to this, if you just said, hey, you want to dream big, you want to get really uncomfortable. Do you know who Cam Hanes is? The hunter?
Big fan.
Yeah, me too. And so he's interviewing Bert Kreischer the other day, and he said, Yeah. And so he said one of his sponsors asked him for Joe Rogan's cell phone number. And he said, the guy's not my sponsor anymore. And his answer was, if Joe Rogan finds you interesting, he'll find you. And I thought, like, what a great aspiration for your podcast, you know, and you start off just like Joe Rogan did, like trying to get everybody to come on. But like a great aspiration would be like, hey, I want to build, the state of MedTech to a point. Like if I find you interesting and I find your product compelling, I'll find you. And then you're like, okay, like how do I make that happen? And then you start to build slowly. It's not catching a wave. It's building a wave. And then how you do that's kind of how I approach things.
I love that. And you're so right. And it's funny you say that because I have a friend of mine. He actually just came back on a show. He's a great entrepreneur, Sam Mahmood. So he's a really interesting background, but long story short, essentially was a device rep, started a distributorship. And then after many years of managing that and, essentially making investments and stuff, he's raised like, I think a $30 million fund, PE fund to acquire paving companies. So that's super interesting. He was asking me when he started his podcast, he's like, hey, like who finds the guests and manages? I'm like, I do. And he's like, well, don't you have like your own team? And I'm like, I do. I was like, but I'm the one who looks for the talent in the episodes because again, just like you said, I'm trying to find the most interesting people and companies in this industry. And at some point I do take recommendations from my team, but nobody has the eye for that yet, like the way that I do, because I've done over 200 episodes, just this podcast alone. And I think what's most interesting about that is that the right content comes through.
That's right.
We're not just having people on the show just for the sake of it. I won't mention who it is, but like I got a request or a recommendation from a certain, let's say a Fortune 500 company to have one of their, I don't want to say what level, but like, let's say one of the most senior leaders on, the C-suite person. And I checked them out and I talked to them and I just didn't like, I was like, this will make the show look really good, but like, I don't know what we're going to talk about. Like it'll be a long commercial for your career and your company, but like, I don't feel like this person's going to be themselves on my show because they have the corporate brand behind them. And then just their personality to begin with, like, it just like, it didn't work. It didn't mesh,
Yeah. I totally get it. And, that's the thing about, and nothing against people that work for big companies,
Nothing against them. No, not at all.
I mean, for me, I worked for a big company, a great company in the industry, and it was just a square peg in a round hole. I'm a small company person. I like to know everybody that works there, and I want to be able to really impact the outcome. And it's hard to do that in a big company. But oftentimes those folks tend to be more corporate focused than people that are like really trying to build something from scratch.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And at the end of the day, like I think, for those, because I think a lot of the people who are listening to this are, junior or they're coming up and stuff, they're trying to get better. And so I would say like, one, you're doing the right thing. Because if you listen to this episode all the way to the end, like you're trying to sharpen your sword and you're trying to get better. I think in my personal opinion, again, I've interviewed a lot of great sales leaders. Jim is one, Joseph is another one. And the one thing, like one of the tying themes that I find is that there's this constant curiosity to go about finding out more, to learn more, to educate. And I think even when you look at physicians, some of the best surgeons in the world, I mean, they're not, their talents and interests are not limited to just surgery, but they know medical history very well. They know global history, they understand politics, they have certain hobbies and stuff. And I don't think it's like a coincidence that some of those influential people in the world, you can name whoever you want at this point, they have this one theme. And I think that that's the way to sort of become a very well-rounded individual. And then you're just better. So that on the fly, like when you're presenting or pitching with no slides, you actually close deals and you move them forward because you're able to move along that because you've just had so many qualitative data points at that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I will go back to our previous point about being comfortable and safe and how that impacts your personal development. So if you're comfortable and safe in your job, or you're comfortable and safe in your relationships or whatever it is, that tends to seep through every area of your life. You become comfortable and safe about your own education, about your own professional education, your own personal education. You spend more time on Instagram than you do reading high quality material and content, whatever it may be. And I'm not down against social media. I'm just saying that, there are great books that can really inform you. One of the things that I love about my current role, I've put myself in this situation multiple times in my career, is I have a love-hate relationship with being in a room filled with people that are much smarter than me. And I love it because I have to be totally focused to catch up. And I hate it because I'm intimidated I'm like, wow, I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I work for some of literally the smartest engineers in the world, software engineers who have built machine learning and AI programs and have sold them to the government. Paul Reed-Smith, my chairman, is a genius in no uncertain terms. And I'll tell you a story. I was driving in my car doing a conference call and with my wife and all of us. If you've been in this business, you've snapped your fingers at your kids like nobody.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Oh, yeah.
And so I'm doing this conference call. It's on speakerphone. And at the end of it, my wife goes, I've been listening to conference calls for 30 years, and I've never heard you speak so little. Like you just listen. I'm like, that's because I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. And so I dove in and said, okay, I've sold medical devices for 30 years. I've never sold software, and I don't understand machine learning. I don't understand AI. And so what I didn't do was I didn't let my own ego get in the way of asking questions that could make me look stupid. And so I built a trust relationship with the people around me. And I said, I don't understand. My line is, pretend I didn't study as hard as you did. And so I'm talking to these genius engineers. I'm like, just dumb it down a little bit for me. And so that's the risk and the joy of being in a high learning environment professionally, where you're like, I'm going to learn not only how they build the software, but where we could use it, how we price it, how we distribute it, how you run it through the regulatory process, all those things. And there's learning parts of all those environments. And I think that's what really gives you deep, deep professional satisfaction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think maybe it's a startup thing, but I personally feel like in corporate America, like let's look at a great example of it's a great company, great corporate company. It's like Intuitive, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're at a company like that, you have to be careful with the risk that you take. It has to be very calculated, like career-wise, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
When you're in a startup, your tolerance for risk and failure goes up so much because you're just dealing with fires, and little by little, your threshold for being embarrassed it goes up, right? And I feel like once that happens, it becomes very easy. Like I noticed this, coming out of medical school, I was, I definitely had an ego and I was sensitive about things, and so I was very careful. But as I went through working through startups and, failures and all these different things, I became a lot more honest about things. And I felt a lot more comfortable admitting when I did not know something. Mm-hmm. And then taking it even further is to put myself in environments where everybody was a lot better than me. And I think that if you get through the discomfort of that, what you realize is that you're able to pick and borrow models from other people to inform your own model in terms of your career, your business, et cetera. And you just get better. I can't think of any other way to do it. You can't do it in a vacuum.
Yeah. Well, my analogy of the life cycle of companies is, and Intuitive is a great example. And I certainly, this is in no way meant to be critical. This is just an observation, is when you are capital constrained and building a company and a product, it's like shining a red laser. And the red laser is pointed at the center of what's important. The center of the core of the business is where the laser. And as you grow, it becomes a flashlight. And then it becomes a spotlight. And so the center of the business is still in the middle, but you are able to add all these other things and other social programs and all these kind of things that are off the center of the business. And then eventually you get to a really big company, and it's like being in stadium light. So somewhere in there is the core of the business, but there's all this extraneous stuff that is added onto it. And whether you think that's right or wrong is not for me to decide. It's a life cycle of corporate America, is that they forget to focus. And you can't always be a laser. That's why they call it laser focused on the business. But as you get into companies that move, the diffusion of the attention to the core business gets wider and wider. It gets easier and easier to hide. And so when you're in a laser focused business, nobody can hide. Like you're either contributing or it's not the right place for you. And even in a business that's like a spotlight, you stand out a little bit if you can't be in the environment, if you can't come forward with results. But if you go into a company that's like stadium lighting where there's all kinds of people, you're like, well, okay, I can hide in here for a while. And that might be the right thing. I think there are stages of life where you're like, I need to just come up for air and hide out for a year or two and get my feet up back underneath me. And people go through those things. And I think that's perfectly fine. If you really want to maximize your career, from a growth perspective, I think that really figuring out where the core of your business, and this goes back to your thing about the rep with the fully penetrated business. I would say go find out where the core of your business is and focus on that and let all the other stuff go and be really hyper focused on being excellent in the core. And you'd be amazed what else falls in the way.
And again, going back to that theme of just having hyper focus, right? And I think, I can't remember where I saw it, that at least in the in the world of careers and stuff, that there's this inability to deal with a certain amount of failure. I got to remember what the context was, but essentially the context was that people these days, that their inability to stick to something and deal with a certain level of failure, right? Because if you do that, right, that's when you end up with like great products, great careers, great people. But because of these people's lack of patience and inability to have a high threshold for pain and failure, you don't end up with great, like the greats, like whether you look at this in sports or business or anything else, and I think part of that just has to do with like a lot of focus and abilities, like flying a plane, that you get off course, but you don't reroute and go back to where you took off from. You kind of just adjust course and keep going.
Yeah. It's really funny about failure. So I'll tell you a story, an intuitive story. So I forget what year it was, but it's when I got the US VP of sales. And so now I'm running the commercial org. And Lonnie Smith, they gave me an office. And I was sitting at my desk, kind of new office, big position. And Lonnie Smith came in and said something to me that, I think it's really interesting. I'll bet you if you had him on the podcast, he wouldn't even remember this, but it was so instrumental to me, like these one-off lines, and that's oftentimes, just a brief segue here. Oftentimes, if you're in a leadership position, you underestimate the power of your own words. And what can seem like a throwaway line or a story or an anecdote can deeply impact something. That's probably, the better part of 20 years ago now. And so, that's just a segue as you communicate with people, just know that your words have tremendous power. But he sat down, I'm all high, I got this big promotion and he goes, hey, I just wanted to let you know, congratulations. And you should tell your wife that essentially you're living a career like a Major League Baseball manager. And I was like, a Major League Baseball manager? It's like, yeah. He goes, Major League Baseball, they can win 80 games and get fired. He goes, it's like if the general manager doesn't like them, they sell the team, they don't like it. Like you can get fired. He goes, and if you want to play at this level, he said, it's like playing at the professional sports level. There's no job security. You're going to get fired. He goes, if you want to keep on going up in your career, you need to go tell your wife, I'm going to get fired. Somewhere along the line, I'm going to get fired. And so, I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. I mean, on the happiest day that I've had in a while, he's telling me that story, but it stuck with me for a long time. And even here, and so everybody gets fired, and I've been fired, and I think I've been fired righteously, and I've been fired where I didn't agree with it. But I will tell you this, that for sure, the best learning experiences that I have had in my career have come from failures. And so what you think is a failure is actually an amazing learning environment. And if you take the opportunity to be introspective and to really understand, like, okay, what was my part in this? How can I be better? How can I do better the next time? It's like these huge growing moments. And that's how I look back. I wrote a LinkedIn article about this a month or two ago, and about how, like, you just have to manage yourself, manage your own emotions, and really understand, like, hey, this is part of it. And if you want to, I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying you worked for the same company for 35 years and retired and got a gold watch or a ring. And I have huge respect for those people. That's not me. And so if you want to push new technology and you want to catch waves and you want to try to create markets, you are going to have failures along the line. And sometimes, failure can be like people are saying really, really, ugly stuff about you. You make mistakes in business. Sometimes you're separated from companies. That's part of it. But that's back to your safety and comfort deal. It's part of it. But the important part is to make it a learning environment and to come out the other end and say, I'm so much of a better person and a manager, and whatever role you play in life, a husband, a wife, a partner, a professional, a sales rep, whatever it is, if you can say at the end of it, you're so much better because of that, that's a good indicator you've managed it well.
I love that. And, as you kind of wrap up, and again, I really appreciate you spending time. It's always amazing catching up with you. But, when you're telling me that story about failure, and again, like looking at it as what kind of things can you learn and take and add to your own models? Great example is, like, I would say one of the most amazing moments technologically this year, and there were a lot of them, was when SpaceX essentially caught a rocket, right? And I would tell the listeners, go on YouTube and type in like SpaceX failing until success. And they blew up a lot of rockets over the last decade and failed miserably. But every one of those failures was that team's ability to take certain things, adjust their model and everything, and refine it, including if you look at the Raptors, like the rockets, what they looked like back in 2019. And how simplified it looks like. Even if I'm not an engineer, but you can tell a huge difference in the simplification of the technology just in the last 6 or 7 years, because it's this constant refinement. And the only way you get that refinement is not actually through success, it's actually through failures. Even like, I don't play darts, but I heard this analogy that in darts, there's more to become a professional dart player. You spend more time figuring out what made you miss versus what made you hit a bullseye.
Right. Exactly. Yep. That's such a good thing. And I saw that same post on SpaceX. It's amazing what they've done. And people celebrate the failures, the crashes and all that kind of stuff, but they don't really measure the underlying learning environment that came out of it. And that's why Elon's such an amazing. You should invite him on your podcast, by the way.
I'm trying to get him for Neuralink. I'll figure out a way to do it. I'm connected to a few people who, like, I'm 1 degree separated from him. I know people who know him, so we'll see what happens. But on that note, Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to thank the listeners. Be sure to give Jim a follow on LinkedIn. He puts out amazing content and posts. And as always, we'll see you all next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.